You ever look at history and wonder how a civilization that could build these incredible continent-spanning roads and literally map the stars can just disappear? Well, it turns out there's this powerful, almost predictable pattern that seems to govern the rise and fall of great empires. So let's dive into this cycle, and we're going to use the epic story of the Viridian Empire as our guide. Okay, this right here, this is the core idea for our entire explainer. We're not just looking at a list of historical facts or dates, we are looking at a life cycle. Think of it like a biological blueprint for how civilizations actually work, from their very first breath to their last. So, where does an empire even begin? Well, it's not on some golden throne. Nope, it starts in the mud. The story of pretty much every great power begins with the simple and often brutal realities of geography and pure necessity. This slide gets to the absolute bedrock of any civilization. For the people who would become the Viridians, their secret weapon was a river that flooded predictably, leaving behind this incredibly rich soil. And that geographical advantage? It created a food surplus. And that is the foundational energy of any society. It means that not everybody has to be a farmer anymore. Suddenly, you can have blacksmiths, soldiers, thinkers. Food surplus is the currency that buys specialization. But see, food by itself isn't enough. You need pressure. You need a crucible. For the Viridians, that crucible was constant raids from a neighboring tribe. Now, to survive, they had to develop this absolutely critical concept, Asabiyyah. It's the social glue, right? That deep, powerful sense of us. When a people faces a threat that could wipe them out, they bond, they learn to trust each other, and that cohesion makes them unbelievably powerful. And this just lays it all out so perfectly. The threat forces them to unify. That unity, that Asabiyyah, lets them innovate. They come up with stronger shields, better military tactics. See, an empire isn't born from a desire for glory. It's born from this intense, energetic, desperate problem-solving. They become a hungry, unified people driven to make their world secure. Okay, so let's move into the next phase and see how this thing snowballs. Once that first big problem is solved, a kind of dangerous and frankly irresistible mathematical logic starts to take over. That small, scrappy group is about to become a full-blown engine of conquest. And this is it. This is the positive feedback loop that fuels that explosive growth. You conquer a valley to stop some raids. Well, now you've got a bigger border to protect, so you need a bigger army. And to pay for that bigger army, you need more wealth, more land, so you conquer the next valley. Each victory literally funds the next, even bigger victory. It just keeps feeding itself. And that's why this quote is so on the money. During this expansion phase, the empire's growth feels almost mechanical. It's unstoppable. It's really less about the genius of any one leader and more about the cold, relentless logic of this feedback loop. But here's the clever part. The Viridians didn't just conquer. They integrated. They built roads. They created a common currency. They established universal laws. You have to think of infrastructure as the cardiovascular system of an empire. Yeah, it moves armies, but what's more important is it moves goods and ideas. And all of a sudden, it becomes way more profitable for your neighbors to just join the empire than to try and fight it. So, after centuries of this expansion, the empire finally hits its peak. Welcome to the Pax Viridia, the Golden Age. A time of peace, incredible prosperity, unbelievable cultural achievement. But this golden illusion is built on an increasingly fragile and incredibly expensive foundation. And hey, it's an impressive run. We're talking 200 years, where the standard of living is higher than it's going to be for another 1,000 years after the empire falls. They're creating masterpieces of art and science. So you have to ask, if life was so good, why did it end? Why couldn't they just keep it going? Well, the answer lies in this metaphor right here. A simple tribe is kind of like a lever. It's easy to build, it's easy to maintain. An empire, on the other hand, is like an incredibly intricate clockwork device. It has millions of moving parts: governors, tax collectors, judges, massive supply chains. At first, all this complexity solves problems, but it comes with an astronomical energy cost. And this is the crucial turning point. The empire slams into a wall called diminishing returns. Each new layer of government, each new fort on the border, costs more to keep running, but gives you less and less actual benefit. The empire stops growing outward and starts consuming itself just to pay the bills. And this is where the story takes a dark turn.
The fall doesn't start with a barbarian kicking down the gates. No, it begins with a slow, invisible rot from the inside. It starts with inequality and political infighting.
This slide shows us something fascinating and incredibly dangerous: elite overproduction. So as the empire enjoys its long peace, the population grows, and that includes the number of wealthy, ambitious elites. But the number of top jobs, governor, general, senator, that stays the same. So you end up with, say, 20 people fighting for 3 seats. What happens? Well, they stop cooperating for the good of the empire, and they start trying to destroy each other. That original Asabiyyah, that social glue, it's completely gone. So while the state is basically paralyzed by all this infighting, its costs just keep going up. The emperors get desperate, and they do something that rulers have done throughout history. They debase the currency. They start mixing cheap, worthless metals in with the silver to try and cover their costs. The result? It's always the same. Rampant inflation. Your life savings? Boof, gone. And all public trust in the state is just shattered.
So after all of this internal decay, the inequality, the political backstabbing, the worthless money, the empire has lost all of its resilience. A healthy society can take a hit, right? It can absorb a shock like a plague or a bad harvest. But this empire, it's now brittle. It looks magnificent, sure, but it's like a glass vase, ready to shatter at the slightest touch.
And the shocks, they always come. For Viridia, it was a perfect storm. First, a shift in the climate causes massive famines and food riots. Then, a new plague sweeps through those amazing trade routes, killing maybe a quarter of the population. And finally, seeing the weakness, migrating tribes on the border start to push in.
And if you take one thing away from this, let it be this: the barbarian invasions are just a symptom. They are not the cause of the fall. If the empire had been healthy, it would have fought them off or absorbed them, just like it did for centuries. The barbarians didn't destroy the empire. They were just the ones who showed up to kick in a door that was already rotten to its core.
So how should we think about a collapse like this? This final metaphor of the forest fire is kind of perfect. A huge fire is terrifying. It's destructive. But it also serves a purpose. It clears away all the dead wood, it returns nutrients to the soil, and it lets sunlight hit the forest floor again, sparking all sorts of new life.
So in the end, the fall of an empire isn't just an end. It is a form of adaptation. The bloated, overcomplex, parasitic system dissolves. It clears the board and allows people to go back to simpler, more resilient ways of living. It's a painful process, for sure, but it's a necessary part of the great cycle. And that, of course, brings us to today. Down in the valleys of that fallen empire, new villages are starting to form. They're developing their own social cohesion, their own Asabiyyah. The cycle always begins again. So the real question for us is, what can we learn from this blueprint for our own time? How do we recognize the signs and maybe build a civilization that makes its golden age last just a little bit longer?
Please like and subscribe.